Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Ruby May. So she is a workshop leader. She sometimes works with Jamie Catto, for example, we've had on the show. She's working a lot with sexuality, with the authentic Eros program, which I've heard very good things about. And she's an expert in women's embodiment. So Ruby, welcome.
Hello.
Hello. How did you get into this? What was the start of your journey with the body?
In my previous life, when I was living in London, which is about 15 years ago, it was around the time when burlesque first started having its revival, and it was kind of underground at the time. And it really activated me because up until that point, I'd never really come across anything to do with sexuality that felt empowering to women. It all felt kind of gross and geared towards men, or just not accessible, not juicy, no resonance. And so I totally got into that scene. I was a designer. I was making burlesque costumes. And during that time, I was doing a lot of personal inquiry into what sexuality means to me, sexuality as a path of healing, as a path of personal growth. I trained later on as a sexological bodyworker with Joseph Kramer. And just intuitively followed my flow, one thing leading to another. But that initial spark was the sense of injustice that I wanted to be inspired by teachers and role models, where it felt like it was about empowerment, and it was about seeing the beauty in sexuality. And it wasn't Tantra, because I didn't know much about Tantra, but the kind of little glimpses that I got of it, I didn't really have much of a resonance with it.
Yeah,
so there was a sense that, like, it's not quite right that sex is so taboo. There must be gold there. There must be treasure. There must be something sacred. But the way that it's kind of dressed up in Tantra, from what I had experienced, it didn't resonate. So I kind of went on my own discovery.
So I'm imagining you're researching, you're doing courses, you're going out there, you're kind of diving into that whole world. And, what are some of the things, before we get to your own work, like what were some of the things you discovered that you thought, that's really good? Like most people don't know what sexological bodywork is, for example. So like what did you discover along that journey?
So sexological bodywork is something that started in the West Coast of America that was originally for gay men. And then it kind of evolved. And the idea behind it was that the kind of sex therapy that's out there is talk-based, mainly. But sex obviously has to do with bodies. And so there's this huge chunk that's missing. And because it's edgy work, and, the line between therapeutic modality and sex work, they developed this modality that had very strict protocols. So the client is on a table at all times. You wear gloves for intimate touch. It's really about supporting a client to really come into contact with their body. It's not about a shared intimacy, really, the practitioner and the client. So it has limitations, which is why I kind of stepped away from it. But it's a wonderful tool to have in your toolkit.
I met one of these people actually in California about 10 years ago, and she'd have rubber gloves kind of thing, almost like dentists would. And so she was quite clearly saying, so some of the talk therapists were shocked that she would touch anyone, saying that makes you a prostitute. And she said, no, because I'm not bringing people off for pleasure or anything like that. But she might be, for example, actually touching people's vaginas or anuses, or doing kind of quite personal sort of de-armoring type work and things like that, but sort of on a table in kind of professional mode.
Yeah. And I think the world desperately needs it as well. And now the sexological bodywork is really popular, no? Like there's loads of people doing the training. And I think it's done loads to support this to bring sexuality more into the mainstream, to make it more accessible. Back when I started, there were hardly any sort of conscious sexuality workshops. It was a very tiny little scene, and now it's really quite big and growing rapidly.
It's almost too big now. I've talked about this on other podcasts before, and one reason I've had so many people on from sort of sex work and tantra is, one, it's juicy and fun, an important part of life, and two, I've just been researching it, and it's about a year now. I've been looking into it. I talked to my friend Adam, Adam who runs Togetherness, and he seemed like a good place to start because I kind of trusted him and I knew him, and he knew a lot of people. He's very well networked. And I've been talking to all these different peoples, and there's, we've had at least 10 people on the show. Listeners can look up episodes with Lynn and Gatry and all sorts of people we've had on. And there's just so much out there. And some of it's kind of hippie. Some of it's more coming from a sort of Reiki and body therapy point of view. Some of it looks sort of like pickup artistry. Some of it's super, super spiritual. Some of it seems to be more about communication skills, like how to ask for what you want and stuff like that. It's just confusing how much is out there now.
Right, yeah.
So how do you make sense of that? I think most people listening to this have some kind of a sex life or, some interest in that area. And they're going, you know what, mate, most people listening to this probably aren't sort of, tantrikas who can give you a multiple orgasm by winking at you. They're not looking for sort of maybe mad kind of crazy advanced sex skills. They just want to have slightly better sex lives. Where do they start?
That's a really great question. And I wish that I had a really great answer. I feel like, one of the projects that I was involved in and failed was a online portal for the kind of sex positive world, which would have a kind of list of different practitioners and workshops that are rated by people, and that there's feedback, and you can kind of have a sort of overall glimpse where you can search for specific things in different countries. And the world desperately needs something like that. There's kind of a German equivalent called trustedbodywork.de, which is growing, which is exciting. But yeah, I think what I find quite relieving for me personally is that with all this feeling of competition and marketing and who's got the snazziest marketing techniques and presentation and at the end of the day, the most powerful tool that people use to decide to go on something is a personal recommendation.
Yeah, I think
so most people who come to my work come because they're recommended, and I think ask people that you already have a resonance with, that are friends of yours, people whose opinion that you'd respect, and ask them.
Yeah. And one of the I feel like I'm being of service with the podcast is so people can listen to Mike Lusada or to you or Gage or whatever and sort of see who they resonate with. And I feel like that's one way, because you're not necessarily going to go try something. Or I know Togetherness Festival is good because you can do like an hour with someone and stuff like that.
Yeah, like a festival like Togetherness or some of the other, there's a great conscious sexuality festival in Sweden every summer. There's Explore in Berlin, which is a little more kind of kink infused, but that's a wonderful way to have access to different teachers and see who you vibe with.
So the Swedish one is at Angsbacka.
Yes.
Just got invited to teach at that. I'm curious what it's like. I heard it's a huge...
At the No Mind one or at the Tantra one?
Something next year. So I know it's like they've got all sorts of things going on. I'm not a Tantra person, so I was surprised they just wanted some yoga stuff. So anyway, maybe one not to talk about online. But I know Berlin's got some crazy shit going down. It's always been a kinky capital.
Yes.
And we had a dominatrix on who's based in Berlin on the show, and that's the second most popular exercise.
Who is that?
It is. Sorry, my mind has just gone blank. It is. Mistress Embodiment was the name of the episode, and oh god, she's a friend of mine. She's going to kill me if she listens. Damn it! Sorry, my mind's gone completely blank on this, but she was brilliant and fun and a bit nervous to be on. But Melissa Tofton. That's her name.
Oh, you had Melissa Tofton.
Yeah, she's a friend of mine.
She's my mate.
Oh, cool. Okay, well, Melissa and I met at a yoga studio, and she had an all black mat and a sort of black leather yoga outfit, and I was like, "We're going to be friends. Who are you?"
Yeah.
And this kind of straight laced.
Great.
So yeah, we had her on. It's been the second most popular episode. So clearly, people are listening. They're interested in this topic.
Yeah.
She tells me in Berlin there's a great scene there, and all kinds of sort of unusual kinky stuff happening. So we're talking to her about that, the kind of kink scene. But the Swedish scene sounds sort of quite new agey, a little bit different from the Berlin scene.
Yeah, Berlin has that grittiness to it, which is why I live here now. I like it because it's a melting pot with different things coming together, even though sometimes it's a bit ridiculous. Like the other day I saw there was like a contact tango underwater.
Naked.
So it's very experimental, but there's like a grittiness here, no?
There's an edge, isn't there? There's a lot of hard drugs, and there's an edge to the place.
Yeah, I like that.
I've heard it's been like that for a while as well. We get a lot of podcast hits from Berlin, way more than any other German city, like way more. Like 90% of the hits in Germany are from Berlin on the podcast. Mm-hmm. And I was looking into history, and there was the Weimar Republic. So it was this like crazy liberal hotbed before the Nazis. Like, it goes like way back in history, and even before that. And the original hippies were German as well, that then emigrated to California. So there's like a whole history of it.
Yeah, Berlin was one of the sex work capitals of the world a long time ago. It has a long history. And it's positioned in an interesting point on the planet as well. Now it's kind of a bridge between the East and the West.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to be there a couple of times next year. I'm going to Kai, who you work with, his festival out there. So I'm looking forward to exploring Berlin in ways that I probably won't talk about on the podcast. Okay, so let's get back to that's enough chit chat. Let's get to your work. So what's the main thing? Horrible question. What's the main thing you teach?
I feel like I have two paths of work. No, one is my passion for a program called Authentic Eros, and Authentic Eros, I really don't think there's anything, if I may say so, I don't think there's anything like it in the world, because we're bringing people together from different genders, so also people who identify as genderqueer or trans, and people with different sexual orientations, and bringing them all together in a space to explore authentic relating, where sexuality is welcome, but it's not so focused on sex. It's focused on what is in the here and now.
So authentic relating is like being present to each other, being present to yourself, like the sort of circling stuff, like this is what's going on for me, being honest about that.
That's part of it, but it's also, we're doing, Kai's background is in continuum.
Yeah.
So we're doing a lot of embodiment practice. We work a lot with boundaries and desires. So learning how to connect with your desire, how to express desire, how to make requests. We're working a lot with open space technology, which is this kind of bridge between workshop land in your safe little bubble and the outside world, where you suddenly forget everything that you learned in the workshop.
The bridging's a big problem with personal growth generally, isn't it? You've got your yoga mat, your meditation cushion, and then how do you get that into the rest of the world, right? You can be in your weird little Berlin sex bubble, and then it's like, how do we take that out there?
So open space, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's basically so we've spent the last days kind of creating this field of trust together and practicing being honest with each other and being present and practicing being playful and all these different things. And then the facilitators step away and you follow your own impulses. And so it's like an afternoon, or sometimes, depending on the length of the training, we can do it for days at a time. But you're left to your own devices. So you create your own experience. And it's the possibility that you focus on something that you find challenging or something that you're curious about, and you use the space to work with your theme. So maybe, for example, if you have an issue in the outside world of being rejected and you're terrified of initiating contact because you're afraid of being rejected, you then can practice asking people, making requests.
Or in my case, not asking people. So it's like a middle space. So it's not as risky. It's a dojo, like a sex dojo. So it's not as risky martial arts analogy, it's not like a full fight, but it's not a kata. It's a sort of sparring type situation where it's like, okay, I can work on something. Let's say I want to be like, hey, I'm pretty good at hitting on blonde girls, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to work on...
Or you could just wait in the unknown and be like, okay, my theme that I want to explore is not being the hunter or the initiator.
Got it. I got it.
The awkwardness of just
being sitting there, jerking off a monkey, doing whatever comes up in the moment. I'm just imagining monkeys. I don't know why. So it's my imagination. Maybe that's my secret desire. Monkeys. Okay. And
it's a beautiful space. It's hard to imagine from the outside, and people have ideas. When I say I work with sexuality, people automatically have ideas that it must involve orgies. And when I say you'd be disappointed.
It's not always gooey. That's what I'm saying.
And at the same time, the beauty, what I love about my work is that I'm not a sex geek. No, I'm not into techniques. I'm not into physiology. I'm not into the...
So what was that word?
Sex geek.
No, but after that, physiology.
Techniques or the physiology.
Got it.
Yeah. I'm into sex because it's a gateway into so many different profound aspects of being human. And I love to be in spaces, and I feel like it's really healing and a powerful place to be when sex is welcome, but it's not focused on sex. So I think as soon as a space is focused on sex, you know, we limit the realms for authentic connection and what's really there, and we sort of narrow ourselves and have goals and places we feel like we need to be. So I'm
pressure, isn't it?
Exactly. I'm into places where sex is welcome, but it's more about play and connection and authenticity, and being true to yourself.
You've used the term sex positive, so I understand that means kind of like anything between consenting adults is fine, that it's about not shaming ourselves around sex. Yeah. It's around just seeing it as a healthy kind of part of being human. Is that a sort of fair frame? And what I like about what I hear you say there and what you're doing is you're not separating that out from the rest of life. So it's not like, okay, this is thing called sex and there's the sex skills and we do that. But there's also just like, I don't know, let's say I'm with a lover, I might just, it's like there's a communication scale, right? I might want to flirt. I might just want to hang out. I might just want to be present touch in a way that isn't sexual. And there's a whole kind of spectrum there that goes, you know, all sorts of communication are part of that. And it isn't like a sort of separated out thing.
And I think it's one of the tragedies of like the times that we're living in is we have like compartmentalized sex and we limit it in so many ways. Now we think it just has to do with genitals. And I feel really strongly about that. I feel like, let me find the right words to say this. I think it's an incredibly powerful thing to realize that sex is so much more than our genitals, and that there's something about being in a kind of sensual communion with life constantly. That, you know, when we realize that sex is more than genitals and sex is more than just to do with humans, it like gives us that sense of interconnectedness with our planet, which I think is really needed for these times, in the times that we feel disconnected. And I think that because of shame, when we compartmentalize sex, and it's like this polarized, either it's sex or it's not sex, we limit ourselves from all the different ways that we can connect with people. And like I've had experiences in open space and witness other people where I'm connecting with someone and a man will be like, oh, I thought I wanted to have sex with you. That's what I kind of was feeling. But actually, when I'm feeling into what's right here, right now, I'm realizing that it's actually more about just being soft and affectionate with one another, or actually I just want to be held. And I love being in a space where we get to look at all the different layers of what's actually going on and play with them.
My experience is men particularly confuse other needs for like touch and affection with sex, because it's always more socially acceptable for men to want to be horny, you know. So it's definitely seen those mixed up. Like I notice in myself as well, like after I've had a lot of needs met, like if I'm teaching on EFC, for example, I get a lot of touch, I get a lot of respect, I get a lot of affection, I get a lot of fun, I get all these things met. And I noticed that my kind of normal desire to have sex so much kind of goes down a bit. And I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. What's going on there? Maybe I was mixing a few things together. So what we're really talking about here is we could call Eros, right? So this force, which is part of us, which I remember I was flirting with a gay guy the other day. I love flirting with old women and gay guys, particularly because it sort of feels quite safe. It feels like I'm not going to get sued. It feels like, okay, I'm not going to get a sort of #MeToo thing going on against me. And it feels like...
God, it's so depressing these times we're living in. Do you know
I have to flirt with gay men. I have to flirt with gay men to feel free. And because what I know is it's going to be pretty well received 9 times out of 10. But here's the thing. What I love about it as well is it's not always goal-directed. So I'm not trying to fuck the gay man because I'm not bisexual. I've never had sex with a man. I don't really want to. Yeah. And it's like I can be quite free to flirt, A, because of the safe stuff. We'll come back to that. I just want to bookmark that I got your emotional response there and I haven't ignored it. But and B, that it isn't like a goal-directed thing. It could be playful and fun. And people say to me, are you bi? And I'll say, no, but this is sexual. So it's sexual in the sense of...
I love that you're doing that. And I feel like, and I wrote about this in the past, that, in this climate of post-Me Too, it's like flirting is almost like activism. It's like a political gesture. It's like the risk of flirting disappearing because it's too risky.
Well, traditionally, men took those risks as well.
Huh?
Well, traditionally, men took the risks of flirting and of escalating sexually. This is why being around gay people is quite different when I'm around gay men. And I've heard lesbian friends tell me it's also quite difficult because they're not quite sure they can go on 3 or 4 dates before they realize anything sexual is happening. Because because there isn't a man there doing the escalating, right? Doing the sort of sense of sexualizing, which is always and I don't think most women realize this, there's always, in the same way as most men don't realize the physical risks women take, most women don't understand the social risk that any guy who flirts takes.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's some truth in that. But yeah, I think, there's different cultures now who have different relationships with flirting. But I'm a big believer in flirting. I feel like when we're flirting and we're not directing it, we're not like it's not goal orientated, exactly like you were saying. It's like we kind of switch this button on us that's turned on by life, and there's something that makes us magnetic. People are curious. We're like attractive to people when we switch that flirt button on. But what I was getting excited about,
let's come back to that.
if I may, was it's so interesting I do a lot of work with male facilitators, co-facilitators, and the women flirt outrageously with them. No men flirt with me though, because maybe I don't know. I think it's different things. I think women are attracted to high status men.
True. As a trainer, that's definitely an issue.
High status women.
Yeah, I think it's more neutral for us. It's not that it's a turn off, but it's more of a neutral factor. I think my experience is if men are relatively strong and secure in themselves, it's not a turn off, but though it is for more insecure men. I see that a lot in Russia. But it isn't an active turn on status in the same way. And I'm glad you said that, because when I've said women are turned on by status, that I get people freak out at me.
Yeah, well,
because you can say things that I can't on this podcast. Like literally some of the things that come out of your mouth, you'll get away with, and I won't. I was looking at a feminist bit of hate mail just yesterday on my podcast with Stephen Kotev, he's like a Aikido friend of mine, and he's a really masculine guy, and the podcasts are really blokey, like 2 old male friends chatting, and the only comment on the website was a piece of abuse, saying, old guys being blokey together, yawn, and it was like, what? We're old friends. This is how we talk,
Yeah, I also get criticised every time I mention anything to do with gender.
So what do we do in this sort of minefield? Because we disagree on some things, right? We've gone backwards and forwards and shared opinions and agree on some things, disagree on others, but it's remained sort of polite and civil, and There's a sense of care there, which is why I stay in the conversation. And it's like, what do we, I mean, is that just the solution in this age where we're all a little bit walking on eggshells?
Yeah, I mean, my practice has been, when I write things that are controversial, I study people's responses. Sometimes I write them down, and I try and learn how other people see the world. And when people are triggered, and it's easy to ignore the content of what they're saying, because that you're like, oh, they're just angry. Oh, you know? But I feel like one path forwards is to really put yourself in other people's shoes and try and see where they're coming from.
Okay.
And I've changed my perspectives on certain things by listening to what other people are saying, even though they've said it in really triggered ways.
You've tried to listen to sort of, okay, even though they're angry and they're maybe shouting at me or using language, underneath that, I wrote a post today about social justice warriors having valid concerns.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because some of my more conservative friends were like saying, but they're just idiots. And I was saying, well, no, I might disagree with some of the excesses that are out there, or, you know, some of the methods or some of the language, but there's a valid concern there, or else just, you know, no one's smart enough to be entirely wrong.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a really great way to see it.
So what have you seen then in this sort of climate that exists currently? You know, is it the sort of the world is waking up to some of women's concerns around safety, for example, and it's become a sort of scream almost in the modern world? It's become a demand, it's become a shout, and then a lot of people just back off from that. They're like, whoa, this is too much. Whereas other people are starting to try and hear that. Like, what's your sense of what's happening now?
Yeah, I was just thinking today how in the days leading up to the Kavanaugh result, it was the sense of like everything is reaching a boiling point, and I had moments of feeling scared, you know, of and feeling excited by that fear of like, wow, if this really goes down, like women are gonna fucking revolt, and yes, that's good. And then having a conversation with someone and someone going, yeah, you know, it's happened in our history so many times that there's such injustice, and people, you know, get their knickers in a twist for a while and then they forget about it and life goes on. And so I'm feeling curious, I'm feeling a little jaded, I'm feeling like there's an anger that's rising. I'm feeling like it hasn't quite reached a threshold where a bigger transformation will take place. I'm feeling like there's lots of great conversations happening. One of the things that I've changed my opinion on, that we've spoken about a little bit, is to do with looking at women's responsibility and women's shadow. And it's something that I personally feel really passionate about, is bringing everything back to ourselves. Looking at the ways in which we've given our power away, looking at the ways in which we've put ourselves in dangerous situations by not listening to our intuition. And no one wants to have that conversation because you get accused of victim blaming. And I think it's important to talk about. And what I've changed my opinion on, though, is that the timing is not quite right.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's down to the individuals as well, right? Like if someone's just coming forward with a lot of pain, that might not be the moment, or probably isn't the moment to be like, yeah, there's another side to this. Do you know what I mean? Like that. Yeah. This is a point of view of a mutual friend of ours, was sort of saying, look, it's not the right timing.
Yeah, I think now is the time for listening, and now is the time for empathic connecting with what women are wanting to share. No, all these stories coming forth. Now is the time for really looking at how we educate our young people on the topics of consent. Yeah. Interesting.
Okay. And I mean, you look at the other sort of hot topic that's in all the papers, as well as kind of sexual violence, is gender issues, right? Mm-hmm. Like just generally like transgender issues around masculinity and femininity. a lot of young people I meet seem sort of weirdly androgynous, or it seems to have become much, much more common for young people to say that they don't identify with male or female, for example. Yeah, maybe you could speak to that a little bit, because you've got doing your workshops, being a dominatrix, and you've got great relevant experience, I think, here.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous to talk about it, to be honest, because I have some controversial opinions that I haven't outed myself yet, so maybe now is the time.
Well, let's just flag that for starters, right? Like, people are, myself included, I'm almost kind of putting this over to you, going, well, you did that. I'm stepping away from it. Like, people are scared to share their opinions on something which is fundamental to all of us.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people sending me private messages who are like, Mark, I couldn't possibly say this in public, but here's what I really, really feel about that thing you posted. And it's probably the one issue I don't post on social media about, because it's just not worth the consequences for me.
Yeah.
And that's pretty shocking, because I'm thinking, if I'm self-censoring and I'm a pathologically big-mouthed Irish rebel, then shit, you can sure as hell be sure that most of the world is self-censoring.
So,
so you want to get in some trouble?
Yeah. No, I will share transparently how I feel about it. I think, I'm connected to a lot of queer people. I'm connected to a lot of genderqueer people. I love being in colourful spaces. I love being in spaces where there's a lot of freedom of expression and a sort of big spectrum of different ways human beings can show up in the world.
Yeah.
I believe that since the beginning of mankind, there have been people in male bodies who feel like they have a female spirit, and vice versa. I think that's something that has been happening since the beginning of mankind. However, yes.
And I want to jump in with a question there. So when I hear people say I'm a woman in a man's body, or a female spirit in a male spirit, is that not profoundly Cartesian? So this is the Embodiment podcast, right? So is that not a profound mind-body split to say a female spirit in a male body, like it was totally separate, like spirit was totally separate from body? That always struck me as a very Cartesian thing to hear embodiment teachers say.
It's confusing. Right, yeah. And I would love to talk more about that in a bit.
Yeah.
My thoughts around, gender and the body. But the reality is that many people have that experience.
Yep, for sure. You don't want to deny that reality. That throughout history, there are people that have felt ill at ease in their bodies, that have felt something was up. And, I'm the first to say, let's be compassionate to that, because from what I've seen of it in Russia, working with people with that, it looks fucking hard. Yeah. Like, that's the first thing I want to say.
And I don't want to have an opinion. Like, people should do what they want to do. No. And one of the trends that I perceive from my eyes now is that we have so much conditioning around gender that has caused harm in us. The way that we limit what a man should be and what a woman should be, the rigidity that we have been brought up with these concepts and how ultimately destructive that is. I think that a lot of this gender fluidity that we see is a rebound from that.
Okay, let me paraphrase and counterpoint. So men and women are raised in certain ways. This is slightly cultural, though, well, a lot cultural, but there is still something across many cultures that could be called sort of a feminine or a masculine way that does seem to, in many cases, approximate to people's biological sex, though it's not the same. And we obviously all have both in our being, and part of psychology is growing in that. And that can be limiting. So someone might say to my niece, hey, you should play with dolls because you're a girl. Whereas actually, boys need to play with dolls to become dads. That's, and they might say you shouldn't be an engineer because you're a girl. You should be a nurse. And I'd be the first to say, hey, that's bullshit. Let her do what she wants.
Yeah.
Doesn't want to play with dolls. Don't make her. If she was, the boy, and so are we sort of roughly on the same page in that part before I sort of add or push back a little bit?
Yeah.
So conservative argument would be gender roles aren't bad, they're relatively stable, and they exist for a reason. And equally, if we end up with more girls wanting to play with dolls and more boys wanting to play with, I don't know, engineering shit, building blocks, that's okay too. And that gender roles were not a huge mistake over thousands of years.
No, there's a truth to some of them. No, they're based on truth, I think. You know, when you look at toddlers, that male and female toddlers, they play differently. You know, there's scientific research around it, and I think we're coming out of this phase now where the whole Judith Butler thing that gender, the whole concept of gender as a social construct, that's rubbish. No, I think that's coming from a wounded place. I think that what I was specifically referring to before is the conditioning that limits us. For example, boys shouldn't cry.
Yeah.
Or being a girl means you're a little bit weaker in many senses than being a boy. Yeah, these are conditioned ideas that really hurt us.
Well, here's
Whether there's differences between genders, I think absolutely, and that's part of what my recent inquiry is around, that I'm really passionate about, that I feel would be beneficial for the world to have more understanding.
Yeah. So I'm hearing you're not an entirely sort of social constructionist, which is good, because the evidence just doesn't support that in any way. It's just the evidence, and anyone who's had children pretty much doesn't agree with that. This has been my experience talking to many, many parents that have tried to raise their children kind of, neutrally the same way. But let's take the one about boys shouldn't cry. I mean, there is actually a genuine attempt to teach robustness and psychological resilience. Like, equally, this idea that boys should cry gets rid of a masculine value of toughness, which has existed and continues to be useful. So, yeah, it's okay if boys cry sometimes, it shouldn't be massively shamed. But generally, do we not want people who don't just cry at the smallest thing? Like, is that not generally a good thing? That there's do you want a man personally who is just crying at everything, or one who's able to manage their own fucking emotions?
Well, I think it's obvious now that there is a skill in resilience and the ability to hold oneself and not collapse, and just as much as there is a skill in being able to allow things to touch us. And I think it's a beautiful point that you made.
So it's good that we teach boys not to cry. And it's also good, because in case people think I'm not seeing your side too here, it's also good that we teach boys to be in touch with their emotions.
Yeah, I think there is value in both. I think it depends on, well, I think you know where I'm coming from.
I do, and I appreciate where you're coming from, Ruby. I do very much. And I appreciate that you listen and you're seeing, it seems to me like you make a genuine attempt to see things from other perspectives.
But I feel really strongly, I want to have this conversation about how we are different as men and women. I feel like we're so used to using differences competitively, or we're so used to sort of conflict, and we're so used to also so used to women emulating men, and I feel like I feel like the world needs it to understand, okay, it's 2018. We all know that we have everything in us, right?
We have masculine and feminine, both exist in men and women.
However, as someone, even though gender identity and biological gender is not always the same, as we just alluded to, even though there is something around having a female body or having a male body that affects what I have access to, the qualities and the skills and the ways of navigating life that I have easier access to, and how I show up in the world. And I feel like it's really important to sort of inquire into what those differences are, so that we can look at what are healthy expressions of being a man and a woman, and what are the sort of dysfunctional ways, and especially when it comes to being a woman, because I feel like we don't have much understanding as to what is a feminine approach to life. We don't have much understanding of that, and I feel like I'm excited to share that with the world, and to use the body, bringing it back to the body, as an anchor, as a kind of a tool to understand what that might be. Does that make sense?
It's starting to make sense. So first of all, you're definitely in trouble with some of our listeners in Sweden and Germany for saying that men and women are different. I once said to the head of a HR department that I was working for in a big company in Sweden that I thought men and women are different. And she was so upset that I never got invited back to that company, despite the fact this was a sort of one-to-one dinner time conversation. And I mean, literally, it was like I was saying, I hate the Jews or something to her.
That just shows you how wounded we are. No, of course we're different. No, we have... Our bodies function in different ways, and we have different levels of hormones. And our hormones have a huge effect on how we experience life and how we function.
Well, I think actually listening to the diaries, my wife follows a lot of trans people on YouTube, and sometimes we watch some of their videos together. She sort of takes a sort of personal interest in various kind of sort of youngish people who are, a lot of them are transitioning, and they have these great sort of diaries. They're really interesting. And one of the things I learned from nearly all of them, that I've heard transition, is they all talk about how different they feel when they start taking hormones.
Exactly. And I think, you start taking estrogen, you start crying more. Your ability to feel empathy changes.
And I've heard people say this, and they've said, I took the estrogen, and then all of a sudden I started crying all the time. Or people on tea, and they're saying, this happened physiologically. And I'm thinking, wait, you've just changed one chemical constituent. This is one hormone that we know about, and there's God knows how many other hormones and neurotransmitters different, all the rest of it. And these guys and girls are expressing so much change from adding one hormone to their system, or two in some cases. And I'm thinking, does that not sort of prove that the embodied environment we're in makes kind of a huge difference here?
Exactly.
Let's talk about women's hormones some more, because obviously I know nothing about this. And actually, I used this as an example today. So I was teaching an anger management workshop to someone, and I was working with a Romanian executive, and I just won't give any more details on that, in London. And this, I was trying to explain the idea of embodiment. And I said, do you find that in certain days of the month that you get more angry? Because we're looking at anger as a particular issue. She was like, oh yeah, one day a month, just, everyone's wrong. That was her point of view on it. And I said, well, that's what embodiment's like. So we have a kind of, a biology, and we have an embodied way of being, and it affects who we are. And you're aware of that one day because there's a shift for you that day. But actually there's another embodiment that you're not aware of, that's how I explained embodiment. Because she was like, okay, well, that makes sense to me, because I know that as a woman I have this cycle and it affects me in this way. And it was an interesting into the world of embodiment for someone who was quite corporate, but she was quite happy to sort of say, yep, one day a month, forget it, you're wrong. Now, that's very simplistic, and it was her truth in that moment. But can you speak to something about kind of hormones and cycles and how that affects women as people and as leaders? I know you're interested in leadership as well.
Yay, my favorite topic. It's my favorite topic because the little activist in me is super activated on this topic, because I feel like it has the potential to really revolutionize the world. Yeah, one of the differences between men and women, if I may generalize, is that we are cyclical, and we don't talk about that. We don't live that way, no? But it means that every single day, if I were to read you a list of the physiological changes that take place in a woman's body every single day because of her hormone cycle, it would take me like
in one day.
Yeah, just the list of different things that are affected. It's everything in your body is constantly changing because of your hormones.
Okay.
And this has an impact on so many different things. No, it has an impact on, very basically, on your energy levels. Yeah. So there will be some days where you are pumped with energy, and there will be some days where your energy is waning. No. And do we listen to that? Do we work that way? No. Yep. There are some days where your ability to be creative is enhanced. There are some days where your critical thinking, your ability to discern what is not an integrity, is enhanced. There are some days where your ability for spatial awareness, for problem solving, all these different elements will be changing. What you have easy access to and what you find challenging. And there's something so beautiful about learning how to connect with your cycle and what's currently easy for you and what's challenging for you, because it invites you to operate in a completely different way, because the way that we are operating from is a kind of top down with our bodies.
Yeah,
right?
enforcing.
Exactly.
Like, we don't respect the fact that it's winter and work less in winter. There's a sort of cycle men and women have. And we had Julia Davis on the show talk about bleed yoga. I just want to point listeners to her, because she did a whole episode on this. And, you know, we talked about how certain athletes will have hard training days in certain parts of their cycle, and they'll make hard decisions where they can be more discerning in another part, because it's sort of going with their rhythm. Is that the kind of thing?
Yes, it makes sense. No, it's like intelligent working. It's intelligence.
Yeah.
And it's like this whole aspect of being a woman that we've ignored.
Yeah. I'm getting really into this. It sounds creepy and weird, but the women in my life who have trust with, I'll now ask, where are you in your cycle? I'm sort of looking for sort of, you know, the ones that don't mind sharing. I'm looking for kind of patterns in that. And as a man, I'm like, wow, there's this whole other area. My male cycle, testosterone cycles are pretty simple. You peak in the middle of the night, because testosterone makes you want to kill and fuck everyone, and that's not all that is that safe. So you peak in the middle of the night and you wake up with a boner, and then it gradually goes down in the day, which is why a lot of people's sex lives aren't so good in the evenings, actually, is because that's when your testosterone's lowest.
I never even knew that about
in the middle of the, that's why you generally have a hard on when you sleep as a guy. You should wake up with a boner if you're healthy, and then over the day it gets gradually less, because it's basically dangerous to your survival to have high testosterone levels. So your system pumps you full at night when you can't get into fights. But yeah, it's why a lot of fights happen in the wee hours of the morning. 2 or 3 a.m. is when it's peaking. And also for people that are having less sex, it's like it can create this weird tension, though, because I've found female partners often don't feel very sexy in the morning, because they need to feel sexy in terms of how they look. A lot of them I've found, whereas as a guy, that's often when you're waking up horniest. So that's our cycle. I think is very simple compared to women's. So.
But going back to this idea of like being top down, no, that's how we operate with our bodies and with many things in life. That the practice of cycle awareness, which more and more women all over the world are starting to adopt as part of their daily life, is that it invites, you know, listening to and responding rather than
imposing.
Exactly, rather than imposing. And I think that's no small thing.
That's a bigger thing, isn't it? That's not just about women's cycles. It's also about our relationship to nature and like self-care. Like, I was noticing on the train today, I'd just done this job in the morning, and I was on my way back to interview you, and I was like kind of tired. I was going to listen to this work thing, and I went, you know what, I'm just going to listen to some music and zone out for half an hour on the train, you know, to recover, because actually I'm more tired than I thought I would be. And if I'd have planned to have done something on that journey, it would have needed to have been put aside.
Exactly. Yeah.
Activism. How does this relate to activism? Because you mentioned activism a few times. So, you know, becoming aware of your hormones, having a better sex life, learning to coordinate, being in touch with the sort of spirit of Eros that kind of enlivens us. What the hell has that got to do with activism?
Well, I think, you know, we used to think of activists as being like people who, like, you know, devote their entire lives to systemic change, and who go to protests and cause big kerfuffles and write letters to governments and And I feel like now is the time where we realize that who we are and how we show up in the world has an effect on our circle of influence, but also beyond that. No, it's like we're part of the risk of sounding a bit like a hippie. We're part of a collective consciousness, and where I'm at and how I show up has an effect in mysterious ways that I can't really fathom. And I believe that it counts how I show up in the world, with the level of care towards myself, the level of embracing all that I am, so that I don't have to like suppress parts of me and then act it out, project it onto others, be destructive in the world. All these qualities that aren't valued in the world, the more that I adopt those in myself, I'm having an impact. So I believe that the body, by focusing on the importance of really listening to our body and realizing that I am not just my brain, but I am body. I am connected to the body of the earth. That is a powerful act of activism. It sounds small, maybe, but I feel like we're at this point on the planet where we all need to do that now.
So I want to underline something you said there, because it was beautiful. It was how I show up counts. How I show up matters. I forget the exact words you said there. It was powerful. Like, that's a simple yet profound thing to say, right? Like, how I am, i.e. embodiment, how we are is a definition of embodiment, the simplest one I know. How we are matters. Nice.
And I'm curious, you know, the people that, you know, we think we care about the world, and then we look out and we watch the news and we go, oh, those terrible people, oh, that Trump, oh, look at them and their terrible companies doing terrible things. And then it's like, well, what is my relationship to greed? What is my relationship to scarcity? Where am I feeling scarcity? And, you know, how does that feel in my body? I'm all about looking at the things that we feel pissed off with in the world, and then asking ourselves how we're embodying that shit too. Because
I mean, Trump, money, sex, and power, right? I mean, the three things most of my hippie mates have problems with: money, sex, and power.
Right?
Like, they're the three big shadows for them, particularly money and power. Actually, they're the three big ones for most of my hippie mates, is that they're really struggling with. I see personally them struggling with those issues.
And it's so much easier to point the finger and say, oh, that doesn't apply to me.
Yeah. So you've got to re-own your inner Trump.
For sure. Like, I had this terrible dream, like, months ago, where I was having sex with Trump.
Oh, God, Ruby, I'm sorry. Oh, my God.
And in my dream, I was just like, I was the female equivalent. And it was as though, like, my unconscious mind was wanting to share with me, like, you've got it in you too.
Wow. I might name this episode Fucking Trump. That's a scary thought. So it does create a shadow, doesn't it, if we have this kind of hate put outside. And I see this in activism, with people pointing the finger out and not looking at their own relationships. I remember years ago, we were occupied, my friend Andy Pace and I, we did a workshop on Re-Own Your Inner Banker. And for half of them, it was profound, the occupied people in this squat we were doing the training in. And the other half just couldn't do it. It was just, they were absolutely refusing. I don't have an inner banker. I don't have any greed. And it's like, well, of course you do. Of course you have greed. We all have greed. So we relate to that. Are you conscious of your greed?
Yeah.
So I heard you.
And I think we can take it to the opposite extreme as well. No, we can just be like, well, you know, I'm responsible for all these things too, and I'll just like work on myself, and I'm not going to call anyone else out on their shit or try and create systemic change because it's just about me. I think
that's the danger, right? It does seem to swing. So the 60s was about politics, and in the 70s it swung back to everything's about the individual, and you know, we change the world by changing ourselves. We don't ever have to look at the systems. You don't need to vote because it's just about meditating. Like, that's the danger of an approach to sort of activism which focuses solely on yourself, right? It can lead to a sort of narcissism, a disengagement with politics and the world. And it seems to sort of swing. We seem to be in a period at the moment of outward engagement in many ways. So I heard you're an eco-sexual, right?
I'm trying to remember who. Yeah, I did some writing for someone called Matt Mellon, who does a wonderful magazine called Eco Hustler. Yeah, there's it's just something that I feel strongly about, that, you know, we love labels, no? We love to like say, oh, you know, that person's a da-da-da-da-da, and put them in a box. And I think there's a beauty in that potentially for creating an identity, because it's like we feel like we can connect with something. It gives us the right to have a certain experience. And I love to be naked in nature. I love to feel erotic chemistry with trees. And I'm not a fucking eco-sexual. I'm just a human. No, part of our birthright is to enjoy being naked in nature.
You're
is to feel
omnisexual, aren't you?
Like sensually, like touches our skin. So I get pissed when people call me an eco-sexual.
Yeah, so you're like an omnisexual as opposed to an eco. An omnisexual would be someone that brings Eros to everything, and that would include being naked in the woods. But
if you have to put it in a box, then yes.
Don't put me in a box. Don't label me.
I'm Ruby May. I defy boxes.
Ruby May, the alt-right, feminist, trans. We'll go blah blah blah, right? Blah blah blah. Yeah, something dies when we put someone or ourselves in a box a little bit, doesn't it? But as you say, those identities can also be helpful. I think it's a tricky place to be today, to not be easily put in a box on, say, the far left or the far right. It seems to be people want to call you either an SJW crazy or an alt-right, kind of neocon, and it's hard to be in the middle.
I think, this is something that we are, I hope, and need to transition away from, is this polarized either or thinking. It's like yes and there's different lenses that we can see things through, and I dig the whole masculine feminine perspective. For me personally, in my journey, it's been really helpful, and I feel like the feminine is this more inclusive diversity of perspectives rather than this either or, which has a gift to it. I would associate that more with the masculine, but it's this more kind of polarized, discerning either or perspective.
So what you're saying is the feminine side's right.
No,
be the case.
This is the thing. It's not right. It's like they're two. This is the masculine that would say that, because the masculine always has to have a right.
So it's actually a very masculine point of view to say the feminine's always right.
No, it's I'm fascinated by what is masculine and feminine archetypal essence, and how that we might be able to glean what that is from studying the body. And it's a beautiful idea, the idea that even on a chromosomal genetic level, that we can deduce something already there. So that life starts as an XX chromosome, right? So all life starts as an XX, all mammalian life starts, this is my understanding, and I'm not a scientist, but starts as an XX chromosome. And then when there is a certain hormone that is produced, there will be a splitting off and a Y chromosome. So
we're all castrated women, essentially. That's what science says. We're X chromosomes a bit snipped off, aren't we, as men?
In that splitting off, you could also say it's the more evolved form of life.
I would never say that, Ruby, because that would be the end of my career.
But I'm saying it, because in a way it's true. That first we were single-celled organisms. There was only a mother, although you wouldn't call it a mother because there was no binary. It was just a single-celled organism. And at some point in our evolution, there was a divide and it became binary. And that is an evolution in our system. So in one perspective, having a binary, having the masculine is an evolution. But there's something in that splitting off and that ability to when something splits into two, one thing can look at the other thing. There's the ability to discern. There's the ability to distance oneself. And that mechanism has something to do with the masculine way of engaging with life. And we have both in us. And they're sort of fundamental holding patterns of matter and energy that all life is kind of made up of. And I'm curious about that. I'm curious how that affects our capacity for navigating life in different ways and making sense of the conflict of genders. Does that make sense to you, what I'm saying?
None of it makes sense, Ruby, but I love what you're saying. I love that you care about it. I feel like this is a dance and a dialogue that's really happening right now. We need to wrap things up fairly soon.
I just say that if anyone is interested in this subject, there is an amazing book. It's an obscure book that not many people have heard of, by a woman called Genia Pauli Haddon. And she writes about the feminine and masculine yin and yang. And she writes about how through studying the body, we see that the feminine has its own particular kind of yin and its own particular kind of yang.
What's the name of the book? Sorry, Ruby.
The books. One is called Self, Sex and Spirit.
Bring that up for me now, Jamie. I pretend I have a Jamie like on Thingamajig's podcast. What's Self, Sex and Spirit? Self,
Sex and Spirit.
Uniting spirit, sex and self.
So through studying the womb, we can see that the womb has a kind of receptive quality, the yin, but also an exertive quality, the yang, which is not really valued or seen in society. In the same way that the man, we think of masculine as being an erect penis. That's the kind of stereotypical masculinity. And we completely forget that the man has testicles, which is the male yin, which is a very different set of qualities.
Got it.
So this is informed my opinion. I dig it.
I never forget I have testicles. Like that's a constant meditation for me. So Ruby, this has been a little flirty, lots of fun. I feel like we've tussled a little, we've mud wrestled a little bit in the mud of gender politics. But it's been fun.
To not trigger each other.
Not too much. I think we did pretty well. I think we got each other once briefly, but not too badly, considering some of the things we've been saying privately backwards and forwards. So let's keep dialogue going privately. We'll see who gets the most hate mail as a result of this podcast. But
I don't get much hate mail. I feel like
get much hate mail. Don't worry. I'll
courageous enough, Mark. I'm not courageous enough. I should be more courageous, and then maybe I would get more hate mail.
Nonsense.
Something to aspire to.
I don't know about that. So, Ruby, it's been a delight. Where can people find out more about you? Where should they go?
I have two websites. One is alchemy-eros.com.
Got it. You and Jamie, Bitches and Bastards Workshop. Great name.
Bitches and Bastards, all about dysfunctional human relating, how to unsabotage your relationships, with Jamie Catto in London and Berlin. And also Authentic Eros Creating New Culture is my website with my colleague Kai Ehrhardt, who hopefully you will get on a podcast at some point.
I actually texted him during the show.
You were texting while we were talking?
Just Kai. He's the only one I sent. The rest was notes on my phone. But I thought you wouldn't mind me texting Kai. I hope it's all right. There he is, the two beautiful looking German men staring each other in the eye on the website. Beautiful.
And he does, I have to big him up too. He does amazing embodiment and community work with gay men, and then the stuff we do is kind of beyond gender. But
I'm going to go just to turn my wife on. Love it. Okay.
Festival.
Have I revealed too much? Okay, so Ruby, this has been great. I've got a respectable yoga podcast to speak on. I need to stop thinking about masturbating monkeys and other things. Yes, so I need to get myself together and be respectable in the next 10 minutes. But do you have a final message about Eros or the body or anything else to part with?
Oh God, put me on the spot, why don't you?
You are dancing beautifully on the spot at the moment.
I would just say the guiding principle of my life, one of them has been to lean into the things that I'm afraid that feel taboo, and that there's treasures always to be found in the places that we expect them least. And that to me is part of life mastery, is like going into where we're afraid, going into where the challenges are, and turning it into gold.
Boom.
How's those parting words of wisdom?
Boom. Spiritual G-spot right there. Ruby, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Subscribe to get more. And you can also leave us a review on iTunes, which helps with our rankings. So really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support the podcast even more, then fund us. Go to Patreon. Give us $1 per episode. Those who don't know, Patreon's a really good way of supporting things you want to see more of in the world. I know like so much is available for free now. And, you know, what I'd say is a lot of energy and effort goes into this podcast. I put it out there for free so everyone can get it. You know, Maud and I work on this. Everyone that wants it can have it for free. And if you want to support us, it is really appreciated. So it's patreon.com/Mark Walsh. And of course, if you want any in-person training, you can visit embodiedfacilitator.com. There's loads more resources there too.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.